Now, there's a few things about this little section of Matthew's Gospel that make it stand out so that we need to sit up and take attention. One is that it's a bit of an interruption in the flow of what's going on. So see if you look at verse 18. Matthew chapter 8, verse 18. When Jesus saw the crowd around him, he gave orders to cross to the other side of the lake. Now see if you glance down at verse 23. We're told, then he got into the boat and his disciples followed him. So that would flow quite naturally. Verse 18, he sees and says, I want to go to the other side. Verse 23, let's get into the boat and go. So verses 19 to 22 are kind of an interruption in between those two things. If you've ever watched, remember that detective show Columbo? Anyone ever used to watch that back in the day? So he's asking loads of questions at the scene or whatever's going on, and then he goes to leave, and then he comes back and says, what? Just one more thing. And actually, in that one more thing is the crucial bit of evidence, or the question that's going to unpick everything. And it's a little bit like, Jesus is about to leave, but Matthew goes, before he does, you need to see one more thing. And this is going to have, like in the Columbo stuff, it's vital information about what it means to be a follower of Jesus. It's an interruption in the flow. It's also a clash against the flow of what's going on. In chapter 8, everything is about Jesus' authority. So if you look to the end of chapter 7, verse 28, he's just finished a sermon. People are amazed at his teaching, verse 29 of chapter 7, because he taught as one who had authority. He then, in 8:3, you see leprosy bows the knee to his authority. In 8:13, paralysis bows the knee to his authority. In 14, fever bows the knee to his authority. In 16, demons and disease bow the knee to his authority. After this section, if you look to verse 26, Jesus leaves, he goes in a boat, he hits a storm, but the storm bows the knee to his authority. The rest of chapter 8 and 9 is demons, disease, and death bowing the knee to his authority. The clashes in this little episode, verses 18 to 22, where everything else is bowing the knee to his authority, these two men don't. It's a clash. You're meant to feel that. If you want to go to another TV show, old school, it's a little bit like, you know, the Only Fools and Horses episode where Del Boy and Rodney crash a funeral dressed as Batman and Robin? Remember that moment? Open the doors, na. And everyone else is in suits mourning. This episode is meant to feel like that clash moment where these two guys are as inappropriately and unbelievably out of place as Batman and Robin at a funeral. Everyone else is bowing the knee. These guys are either clamoring for Jesus' authority, they want to share in it, or they are questioning and putting conditions on his authority. They're refusing to submit to it. See, this is just a little section, just a few verses. But Matthew has positioned them to make a massive point about what it means to relate to the authority of Jesus as one of his people. Total authority ought to lead to total obedience, total allegiance. And these two men are going to push that point for us through their poor example. All right? And so we're just going to take them one by one. So read again with me, verse 18. This is the first guy. When Jesus saw the crowd around him, he gave orders to cross the other side of the lake. Verse 19. Then a teacher of the law came to him and said, Teacher, I will follow you wherever you go. Jesus replied, Foxes have dens, birds have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. Another TV show, I don't know why I was thinking of TV shows this week, Sesame Street. Remember at the end of most episodes it says, this show has been brought to you by the letter. Now this guy, this point of my sermon, is brought to you by the letter I. Because I think in that little word is the big problem with what this man has as he comes to Jesus. He comes to Jesus and says, Jesus, I will follow you wherever you go. Now, in a world that craves fame, clamours after Instagram followers, you would think that this guy is an absolute dream for Jesus. Jesus, I will follow you wherever I go, wherever you go. In a world where it's hard to get enthusiasm out of people, sometimes it feels like you're trying to draw blood out of a stone, just lifeless. Masks don't help. But you would think, here's a guy who's oozing enthusiasm, loyalty. I'll follow you wherever you go. You'd think, Jesus, sign this guy up. He's even a teacher of the law. Jackpot. You want this guy on your team. But we need to slow down and look carefully at what he says. Look at it again. Teacher, I will follow you wherever you go. Now you can just notice, he has made following Jesus about what he will do for Jesus rather than what Jesus must do for him. See, when you read this in the flow of what Brenda read us, from the leper to the centurion to this, the words are significant. Look back to the leper in verse 2 of chapter 8. A man with leprosy came and knelt before Jesus and said, Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean. Jesus reached out his hand, touched the man. I am willing. The words there are actually just simply, I will be clean. Jesus says, I will. It's the same with the centurion. Look at verse 6 of chapter 8. Lord, he said, my servant lies at home paralyzed, suffering terribly. Jesus said to him, shall I come and heal him? Again, the words are exactly the same as what he says to the leper. I will come and heal him. I will. So here's these two men, the leper and centurion, who are begging Jesus to use his authority to do for them what they cannot do for themselves. And Jesus says, I will. I will. All right, so the flow of chapter 8 is that being a disciple of Jesus, a follower, is not about what you can do for him. It is about what he must do for you. And he says, I will. I will. What does this man now say? I will. I will follow you wherever you go. The others come out of desperation for what Jesus must do for them. This man comes in self-dependent determination about what he will do for Jesus. And that never ends well. If you read on in Matthew, you'll get to Matthew chapter 26. And Jesus has just said to his disciples, you're all going to scatter and flee and you'll leave me. And Peter pipes up and he says, even if all fall away on account of you, I never will. But by the time the local rooster cried the next morning, Peter had denied him 3 times. See, here's my read on this guy who comes to Jesus. I will follow you wherever you go. He's a teacher of the law. He calls Jesus teacher. My guess is he has seen the crowds as a teacher that Jesus is drawing. He's seen the authority that Jesus is wielding, and he wants a bit of it. And in his head he thinks, if I follow Jesus and Jesus teaches me, then maybe I can have the same authority and following that Jesus has. See, Jesus saw the crowds in verse 18 and he wants to withdraw, whereas this guy sees the crowds Jesus is getting and he wants to cash in. He's not coming to Jesus for Jesus. He's using Jesus for himself. The problem is the letter I. I will, I want. It's all about himself. About what he will do by himself and what he actually wants for himself. He doesn't see himself like the leper and the centurion, lost in need of Jesus. But his heart is full of lust about what he thinks he wants other than Jesus. I will. And Jesus reads them as easy as a little kid's book. And he says to them in reply, verse 20, Jesus replied, foxes have dens, birds have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. What a weird answer. Sounds like something Eric Cantona would say, doesn't it? Remember Cantona? When he goes, when the seagulls follow the trawler, it is because they think sardines will be thrown into the sea. And you're left going, Eric, what are you smoking? What are you talking about? But this man isn't clamouring or slavering after sardines, but he is slavering and clamouring for authority. And in these words, Jesus speaks about his own authority, but particularly his own use of authority. Look at it again. The Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. We saw at the start of the service when we read Daniel 7. Son of Man is this being that God has given authority, glory, and sovereign power. When you hear the words, the title, Son of Man, you're instantly to think authority, glory, power. And Jesus had that. Demons, disease, death. But here's the shock. Foxes have dens, birds have nests. Son of Man, homeless. Total authority, absolute authority, put next to absolute poverty. How does Jesus, the Son of Man, use his authority? Not for fame, not for a following, not for self-service, not for self-promotion. It is an authority that makes itself homeless, to bring the outcast home and to make the broken whole. And Jesus makes sure that this teacher of the law knows that following him will not lead to fame in this world, but shame. It's not going to lead to flashy hotels, it's going to lead to homelessness. It's not going to lead to popularity, it's going to lead to persecution. It's not going to lead to celebrity, it's going to lead to crucifixion. Here's what he's saying to this man. To follow me, that problematic I will, I want. The problematic I must die. That's why on your sheets it says, Jesus here is calling us to die. To die to ourselves. See, if you're a new Christian, maybe just contemplate and considering what it's going to be for you to follow Jesus. You need to see the difference between the leper, the centurion, and this guy. To follow Jesus is not about you saying, Jesus, this is what I will do for you. It is begging Jesus for what he can do for you. I vividly remember growing up in church as a teenager, sitting in a church service like this, listening to the Bible being preached and feeling its authority. And every week I can vividly remember it being laid out, the life that I should be living, but all the while I know the life I was living. And there was a massive gap. And I can remember sitting in those pews in the centre of town, and numerous times, week after week, praying to God, saying, all right, God, this week, this time, I'm going to live for you. And you know what? It never worked. I never changed. Because self-determination and self-dependence is never enough. The start of truly following Jesus never comes with the determination of self, but with desperation for a Saviour. Again, some of us have come through, attend loads of recovery groups. They can be good things, but again, you need to be careful of that dangerous I. I will get myself clean. I will get myself sober. This time, I will take my sobriety seriously. I. But we need to see that it's not what it means to be a Christian. It is not about saying, I will. The I must die. It's about coming to Jesus in absolute desperation, absolute dependence, and crying out to saying, Jesus, I can't. Will you? And the amazing answer from the authoritative Son of Man is, I will. I will. The Son of Man uses his Son of Man authority, glory, and sovereign power to the end of self-denial, service, sacrifice, and suffering to save us. I will. But if you're new to this, you need to see that's not just a way into Christianity, it's the whole of the Christian life. The shape of your life comes one where you follow after the one who has absolute authority, and so he deserves your absolute allegiance. You're following one who uses his authority to serve others. You're following one who uses his authority to make others rich by taking poverty into himself. You're following one who prays even in the face of death, yet not what I will. You see that again? Yet not what I will, but your will be done. So yeah, the I must die, I can't save myself, but the I's got to die daily. The purpose of my life as a Christian is not to serve my own selfish desires. But following him will for us look like self-denial, suffering, sacrifice, and service. Following him will mean taking whatever opportunities and authority God has given us for the good of others. Now, I need to do this quickly, but I need to say these things importantly. If you are a husband, the authority God has given you is not to be used for demanding things from your wife. If you're a parent, the authority God has given you is not to be used to dominate your children. If you're an employer, the authority God's given you is not to be used to be an abusive dictator over your employees. If you are an elder in this church, the authority God's given us is not to lord over his people. It is authority used in the service and sacrifice for others. And that's what this man, this first man, completely misreads. He's clamoring after an authority that can give him fame and a following. And Jesus reminds him, foxes have dens, birds have nests. The Son of Man uses his authority in such a way that he has nowhere to lay his head. Following Jesus is never about being self-made, never about for the sake of self-promotion. It is dependence and desperation that then submits to his authority for the sake of serving others. Do you see the point? All right, let's get on to number 2. Second lad, look at verse 21. We'll read this again. Another disciple said to him, Lord, first let me go and bury my father. But Jesus told him, follow me and let the dead bury their own dead. Now these verses 21 and 22, if the first one is, this show is brought to you by the letter I. This show is brought to you by the number 1. The issue in this man is how he's relating to the authority of Jesus in terms of what he puts first. Now let's admit straight away, certainly at first reading, I read this and I instantly feel for this guy. And I find what Jesus says to him quite hard and quite cold. Anyone else feel that? So we've got a little bit of work to do. Because when I read this, I think, I love my dad and there's no danger I'm missing his funeral. So let's dig into this. I think we need to start, first of all, by looking at this word first. The number 1. Because again, I think that speaks in terms of authority. So in your life, whose voice has the first place? Whose voice is the bottom line? Or whose is the last say on anything? Whose voice is the important one? The first one. In the sermon Jesus preached in Matthew 5-7, he spoke to a bunch of people who were worried about their life. Where am I going to get food to eat? Where am I going to get clothes to wear? But he said to them, don't worry, your heavenly Father knows you need them. But seek first his kingdom, his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you as well. Now, how important are food and clothing? You just need to answer that question by going, how different a meeting would this be if we were starving and naked? Changes pretty significantly. Food and clothing are important. However, Jesus is saying there is something that comes first. There is someone who deserves the first place. God first. Seek first his kingdom, his righteousness. Everything else finds its right place from second place down. But as well as number 1 speaking in terms of authority or importance, I think number one often speaks of urgency. So look at it this way. Look again at chapter 8, verse 1. I know we're getting to our Bibles a lot, but it's not a bad thing, right? Chapter 8, verse 1. He's just finished a sermon. Who's the first person he meets when he comes down the mountain? The leper. Why? Because he's desperate. The matter's urgent. He must be first. Look again down to verse 5. Who's the first person he meets when he gets into Capernaum? The centurion. Why? Because he's desperate. The matter's urgent. He must be first. I think the same urgency is in chapter 8, verse 18. What has Jesus just said he's going to do? Go to the other side of the lake. By verse 23, where's he going to be? Gone. When this man comes to Jesus and says, "First let me," Matthew's presenting this as it's now or never. It's urgent. That's why Jesus replies to this guy in verse 22 by saying, "Follow me and let the dead bury their own dead." See, it sounds cold, but it's not coming from a heart that's cold. It's coming from a heart that is bursting with compassion. The words "follow me" are authoritative words from Jesus that are calling us to life. All right, if the first guy is he's calling us to die, the I must die. The second guy is he's calling us to life. It's interesting, right? The image Jesus uses for the first guy is foxes and birds. What's the image he uses for this one? It's almost zombies. It's corpses burying corpses. See that? He's saying, let the dead bury their own dead. He's saying, let the spiritually dead bury the physically dead. Jesus' view, as he looks out in the world, is of people who are sleepwalking their way to hell. They are spiritually dead. They are dead before they are dead. Living by their own authority, it's like they are comatose. The living dead. And that's why what Jesus says to this lad isn't cold, it's compassionate, because he's saying death isn't something that should delay you from coming to Jesus. It's something that should drive you to him. Death isn't something that should make you delay. It should make you come to Jesus first. Urgent. There's a massive contrast. It's almost comical between this guy's approach to death in chapter 8 and another guy's approach to death in chapter 9. This guy comes to Jesus and his dad's just died, and because of that he wants to delay following Jesus to bury his dad. In chapter 9, a dad comes to Jesus whose daughter's just died. But he says to Jesus, if you say the word, she will live. And Jesus raises her from death to life. Our guy wants to delay following Jesus when Jesus could have delayed the funeral. Could have cancelled it. Why would you attend a funeral when the death destroyer is the one you are speaking to? Why would you say, first let me go and bury my father, when you could ask, Jesus, say the word and he will live? But he's got too small a view of the authority of Jesus. And so he's got too slow an attitude in submitting to Jesus' authority. See, the call to follow Jesus and let the dead bury their own dead is not a cold thing, it's a compassionate thing. Because he's telling you, come out of spiritual death into the life that is truly life. You put anything else first in your life, it is detrimental to your life. It is death. You put Jesus first, dead things come to life. It is life to the full. It is life knowing him. It is life in freedom of death that cannot be the end of you and life that will never end. And so the application is clear. He says to you today with absolute authority, follow me. The only unclear, uncertain thing is how we will respond. Some of us, for some time now, have been going, first let me. And in terms of importance and priority, Jesus has been second, third, fourth, who knows where. We're responding to Jesus' authority with conditions. We're not bowing to him, we're bartering with him. And when you barter with Jesus, you're toying with death. It's Jesus second, it's Jesus tomorrow. It's, let me live my life first. It's, first let me prioritize my relationship with my partner. Or first let me just get high for a little bit longer. Or first just let me. Or first just let me. Or first just let me. If you're not a Christian but you hear Jesus calling you to life, do not delay. Follow him today. Stop procrastinating. Stop prioritizing important things but lesser things. You need to follow his call to life. Don't prioritize things that will die over someone who can give you eternal life. I find it really irritating that Jesus doesn't tell us, or Matthew doesn't tell us, how these two men responded. But in some ways, the uncertainty of not knowing how they responded puts the weight on us and goes, okay, well, how will we respond? Actually, in the words of Paul in Ephesians 5, maybe today you just need to hear these words. Wake up, O sleeper, rise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you. From death to life. Don't wait till tomorrow. Don't leave it until second on the to-do list. Now. Today. But you know what? I don't think it's just for people who are just at the start of the journey. I think some of us as Christians probably need to check ourselves and go, what is my relationship to the authority of Jesus today? Is he first or is he nowhere near? Is he the one I'm bowing down to, or is he the one that I'm trying to barter with? Am I just like using him as a get out of hell free card and refusing to submit to him on earth? You have a question, right? When was the last time that there was a clash between your will and Jesus' will, and you bowed down and you followed him? When was the last time there was a clash between what Jesus wills and what you will, and you said, okay, I is going to die, I'm going to go in second place, and I'm going to obey him? We need to answer the call today. Don't delay. But there is a sense in which we can get into a pattern in our Christian lives where Jesus has been saying for a while, maybe, go. And we've continually said no. Or Jesus has said on repeat, don't. But we've still been doing it. Or maybe Jesus has been saying, speak. And we've continually stayed silent. If that's the case, you need to ask yourself the question, who's Lord there? Because it ain't him. Following Jesus, let me finish with this. Following Jesus, submitting to him, putting him first, will feel at times like death. But it is the way to life. And following yourself, having yourself as your own authority and putting yourself first will for a time feel like life. But it is actually death. And we need to get to the moment where today we're responding and answering the call and saying, today, this day, choose whom you will serve. Will you follow him? Will you do more than just call him Lord? And like everything else, leprosy obeys, paralysis obeys, disease obeys, demons obey, death obeys, the storm obeys. What about you?